People have different opinions on what it means to be a real man.
A real man doesn't have to draw attention to his actions.
A real man, not some drunken, broken down, flaccid undertaker who is just as dead below the waist as his clients are.
Because a man that doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man.
He says if I walked in there and saw him naked, I'd grow up never feeling like a real man.
Real men can take it, and I'm a real man.
A real man, he's honest and forthright and trustworthy.
You know, it takes a real man to drive a pink Cadillac.
Finally, a real man.
But what do evangelical Christians think a real man is?
All of us, and that is masculinity, biblical manhood, biblical masculinity. In other words, what does it mean to be a real man?
First of all, you have to remember that we live in a society.
Despite what our modern feminist society is trying to tell everyone, women are still attracted to and want strong men.
Maybe, but I have this feeling that different women are attracted to different things. And some women actually aren't even attracted to men at all. And also, different women define strength differently. From emotional strength, intellectual strength, physical strength.
When women take over a culture, men become weak. When men become weak, they can be conquered. They can be conquered. You're watching that happen in this country. As more and more and more and more women ascend to power, more and more men become weaker and weaker and weaker, and the level of vulnerability just keeps escalating.
If having a woman boss or seeing women politicians makes you feel weak, then you were already weak to begin with. It's not about them feeling weak or powerless. It's about having to share power. It's about not being able to feel powerful by pushing other people down. If the way you feel strong is by keeping people down, you were never strong to begin with. You were just an oppressor. Strong men are not afraid of women in power. That is the definition of a weak man. Someone who was always weak, but just pretending to be strong and powerful.
You know, times are changing. Ladies can do stuff now. And you're gonna have to learn how to deal with that.
What? Were you saying something? Look, I don't speak Spanish.
I mean, the only reason a house should have a mirror is because there is a woman in it. Until you get a woman and marry her, I'm not sure you even need a mirror in your house.
Apparently, real men don't use mirrors. I guess his beard just naturally grows into those perfect lines. I guess he just dyes it and shaves it freestyle without a mirror.
We have round mirrors, wall mirrors, rectangle mirrors, fancy mirrors, baby's first mirror, brown mirrors.
Remember when you first met her? Remember what you used to do before y'all go out? You would shower. Remember that? You put a shirt on with buttons, no team logo. You would drive to a restaurant where you had to get out of the car and sit down at a table. A clown didn't give it to you through the window. You know what I'm talking about? Remember, you eat frozen yogurt? What grown man eats frozen yogurt? A dating one.
What does a frozen dessert have to do with being a man? It's almost like it's all arbitrary.
Well, I don't think it would take a sociologist to see that we're in a bit of a crisis, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years in our society here in the West. And there's really been an attack on gender, and an attack on gender is an attack on the character and nature of God, because it was God's idea to create us male and female.
There hasn't been an attack on gender. People are just understanding gender better now, and understanding themselves better now, and their own gender in a clearer way. Then we have weak people who are afraid of change and respond to new ideas with anger. And they react to this new understanding of gender in the same way that they have always reacted to anything they don't understand.
They believe that destroying traditional masculinity will create a better world. They think strong men are actually the problem, not the solution. So they're tearing down the load-bearing walls of civilization, thinking they're just removing oppressive structures. They're not evil masterminds. They're true believers, which is actually more dangerous because by the time they realize masculine strength was holding everything together, the collapse will be irreversible. Look around right now. Who laid the brick, dug the trench, wired the grid, framed the roof? Who keeps the lights on and the streets safe? Men erected the Empire State Building in 410 days, slamming steel at dizzying heights with nothing but grit and a lunchbox. Men carved the Hoover Dam through deadly heat. Over 100 died bringing water to millions.
I'm a man who discovered the wheel and built the Eiffel Tower out of metal and brawn. That's what kind of man I am.
Men stormed Normandy, knowing that most wouldn't survive. Men built the world you're standing on.
Strong men can be part of the solution, and no one's saying that men's voices don't matter. The problem is that way too many men don't want to be part of a conversation because that involves listening and understanding. And way too many men have taken disagreements and pushback as an attack. They are not used to being challenged on anything, so any slight challenge, any slight inconvenience is seen as an attack. Too many people see an opposing viewpoint, especially from a woman, as an attack. Too many men aren't equipped to take any criticism or any feedback, so they crumble because they were never actually strong. They've convinced themselves, or they've been convinced, that being stubborn, that being bullheaded is strength. So when they are confronted about being stubborn, about being bullheaded, they see that as an attack on their strength. They've convinced themselves that the only way to be strong is to not listen, to never look inward, and to never change. And that is not strength. That is fear. That is weakness. And also, you can't exclude people from spaces and then say it wouldn't have been done without them.
We live in a world where men have been told to sit down and shut up.
Don't lead, don't challenge, and don't be a problem. Hollywood says men are muscles, money, and mayhem. Or we're dumb dads that only dream about our glory days.
Back in '82, I used to be able to throw a pigskin a quarter mile.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious.
The news, they mock manhood, and they call our strength toxic.
We need to have a conversation, let the healthy mask. And I want to be clear too, folks, we're in a war.
And a generation of men have been raised to apologize for simply existing.
The real crisis, though, isn't men just existing. The real crisis is that the real men have gone missing.
Again, no one is saying men can't lead or men can't speak up. They are just saying that too many men won't listen to opposing viewpoints to the point where they get belligerent. And then when they are escorted off the premises for being a tantruming toddler in a man's body, they act like they are being oppressed, when really they are just being held accountable. When really there are just other voices in the mix now. But if anybody is being persecuted for just existing in America right now, it's trans people, it's immigrants, it's brown people, it's black people. It's certainly not men for being men. What happens with these men is they say or do something disgusting and get called out for it, refuse to believe that they could ever do anything wrong, and claim that they can't say anything anymore.
Ask, well, what happened? Because something has gone horribly wrong. Like, how in the world did we go from the Apostle Paul and William Wallace and John Wayne to a bunch of grown men with beards and dresses mocking the Last Supper at the Olympics?
They weren't mocking the Last Supper. It was meant to be Dionysus. Also, John Wayne was just an actor pretending to be tough. And also, John Wayne was a raging white supremacist. So maybe he's not the person you'll want to look up to.
What has gone wrong? Well, the list is long. Ultimately, sin has corrupted everything. We could talk specifically in our culture about slavery and the racialization of our society and how that has torn families apart. We could talk about the Industrial Revolution when dad went off to work every day instead of staying home to help raise sons. This is where the lunch pail and the lazy boy are invented.
Lazy boys and lunch pails ruining men. Before lazy boys, there was no way to relax. You just had to be manly men all the time.
We could talk about the woke mind virus that kind of ran through our culture lately.
You know, the people who don't like racism or sexism or hating people for their sexuality or gender identity. You know, that woke mind virus. You know, the mind virus that says, why don't we treat people how we would want to be treated? Or do unto others as we would have them do unto us? Or love our neighbor as ourselves? Those people.
But the reality is that regardless of what our culture says about manhood, God has called us to be a man.
I mean, I don't think it's a calling to be a man, but sure, be a man. Be a big, strong man. But being a man doesn't mean you get to tell other people who they are.
Well, first of all, there is a difference between a man and a woman. I know that, and today that's shocking.
Nobody thinks that is shocking. We're just saying that there are no roles that are only for men or only for women, and that gender is a spectrum.
But, Paul told the Corinthians, act like men. There had to be a basis for that.
But these men are incapable of thinking about manhood without being dismissive of trans people's experiences.
We're kicking off a 3-week series on biblical masculinity this morning. I'm not talking about the difference between male and female. I think that's fairly easy. I mean, maybe not, but a male has an XY chromosome and a penis, and maybe that's the first time you've heard that word from the stage. And women don't. So I'm talking about the difference because here, I think we know this intuitively. You can have an XY chromosome and a penis and not be a man, right? So great. What does it mean then? What does it mean to grow into who God made us?
It seems to me like he's very confused about the difference between sex and gender. But just because something seems intuitive or common sense doesn't mean that it is. And it doesn't mean that it always is the case. There is a huge difference between saying that all swans are white and all swans that I've seen are white, or even saying most swans are white. And there's a huge problem with saying that all swans are white and any swan that isn't white isn't actually a swan. Just because something seems intuitive or seems common sense doesn't mean that it is, and it doesn't mean that it's the rule. And this conversation always forgets that intersex people exist.
We live in such a crazy time that you got to start out with what is a man? I mean, who would have thought that we would live in the kind of day where that needs to be defined? Now, just put this on the bottom shelf for everybody. An adult human male is what we were talking about. To be a biblical man is more than that.
Okay, so he says that it's an adult human male. The end. That's all it is. But also he has an entire book about what it means to act like a man and goes on speaking tours telling people how to act like a man. If it was just about plumbing, if it was just about chromosomes, if it was just about the age, then he wouldn't need to do any of that. How to be a man? Just have a penis and be over 18. The end. I don't have to go on a speaking tour. I don't have to write a book. But that's not the case. And that's not what they believe. These guys are continually talking about what a real man is and what is the difference between a boy and a man.
A boy becomes a man when he gladly steps into the responsibilities given to us by God and does not see them so much as a burden, but as a gift to be stewarded. So for me, it happened really early simply because my family situation, I just found myself in a place where I had to be the man at like 15 years old. And, you think about the greatest generation that's storming Normandy. Well, the reason those teenage boys could pick up a gun and go do that is because they had to.
Mm-hmm.
And when not much is required of you, then that's about what you get from people.
It's true. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, he was still a boy. He was just a boy with way too much responsibility. Now, I'm no psychiatrist. I'm no expert, but it seems to me like he's been trying to prove himself ever since. Continually trying to show that he is a real man. And maybe real maturity is knowing that you can just be yourself and you don't have to act like a man or you don't have to act like anything. You can just be. You can just be yourself. And the boys who stormed Normandy were still boys afterwards, if they survived. They were still boys. They were just boys with lots of trauma. War doesn't make you a man. War just breaks you. Wars don't happen so that these guys can talk about how we used to go to war, how a real man goes to war. War primarily happens because of greed. And the men who go to war or the boys who go to war are the sacrifices.
Men are team players. Boys want to be MVP. They can't make commitments, can't get married, can't keep a job. Well, that's number 3.
I'm not a baby, I'm a man. I am an anchor man.
Some people don't want to get married. Some people get married and suck at it. And some people have trouble keeping a job because of mental health reasons or 1,000 other reasons. I can work well in a team for a time. I just prefer to work alone. None of that has anything to do with whether or not someone is a man. It's just people are different, people do things differently, and people have their own journey to go on.
A boy needs to be led. A man needs to lead himself. A boy needs to be tended to and cared for, and a man needs to look after himself. So first leadership is self.
It seems to me like it's always men who talk like this, dress like this, who use weaponized incompetence to avoid doing their own laundry or emptying the dishwasher. But the difference between boys and men usually just comes down to how they play into capitalism, how they're used as a cog in the capitalist machine.
Yeah, this is the difference between boys and men. Boys use their strength, use their vibrancy for themselves. They don't work to cultivate. They don't work to shape and mold and build something that doesn't, in the end, destroy. But they build actually that which brings life. So that's work it.
They get their self-worth, they get their value based on how they are used for capitalism.
I went to the stock market today. I did a business. I keep telling him he works too hard.
But you said boys consume, men contribute.
Yeah.
Boys consume, men make sacrifices.
Right. Men who don't work aren't men, right? They're just boys, but they're not men. What happens when you're a boy is somebody else takes care of you. When you become a man, you take care of yourself. Furthermore, when you become a grown man, you take care of somebody else, like your wife and kids. And that's through your work. God made men to work.
Your worth is tied to your work and your production. And even after giving decades of that labor, you're shamed for wanting to take a break.
Men are workers, just like Joby talked about tonight. Brilliant, Adam and Eve. How many people think that work was a curse?
Right. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Fruitless labor is a curse.
Yeah.
Men understand that. Men don't want to freaking retire.
Right.
They want to keep adding value somehow.
Yeah.
Where boys want to just play every day,
Yeah.
and men have a minority position.
There is value in rest. There is value in spending time with the people you love. There is value in enjoying your life, your one shot at life. You are more than just a machine to make money for other people.
Took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Listen, work preceded the fall. Work was not punishment. Work is a part of God's design for you. Men, we were created to take responsibility. My daddy used to always say, a man is like a flatbed truck. He drives straighter with a heavy load. How many of you know that's true? A lazy man is a dangerous thing. A dude is a dangerous thing. A man that is physically a man but acts like a boy is a dangerous thing. How many of you know what got David in trouble? The time of the year when kings were supposed to be all fighting, what was that dude doing? He was lazy, laying on his couch because he had abdicated responsibility, and then he walks out on the front stoop and he sees Bathsheba, and everything goes to hell for him.
Wow, there is so much to unpack here. First of all, King David was a sexual predator who got a man killed so he could steal his wife. If the only way that you can avoid doing harmful things is to keep working so you don't have time to do harmful things to people, then may I suggest going to therapy? May I suggest taking time to better yourself, to learn about yourself, to ask yourself why you have these desires to cause harm, to hurt people. And may I suggest getting in that flatbed truck and leaving society altogether if you can't take care of this. Saying you should keep working, otherwise you'll do bad things, just means that you're a bad person who needs to do a lot of work on yourself. It's not an argument for work, it's an argument for getting help.
So what does God ask men to do with their strength? Work. Work it. Like I said several years ago, brothers, you should not be going to bed with all kinds of energy. Like if you're going to bed tired, praise God, you're probably fulfilling your calling. Right? But if you got all this energy, I'm wondering, like, are you on the edge of what God has called you into? Because work is hard. Like he wants us expending strength, not just playing. Although play is important.
He writes sermons for a living. He stands on stage and talks. What strength is he talking about here? Is he exhausted from his annoying hand gestures? But they take the Genesis story of Adam being told to work to mean that every man's calling in life is to work hard until they die from it. So even though these people aren't living that themselves, they are sure as hell going to tell their congregation too. And I mean, why not? They get 10% of that.
Now, this doesn't mean that a woman cannot work. She can work as well. But it focuses on the man here, that you are the provider. God is against lazy men, and he wants you to work hard for your money, to provide for your family.
Now, I'm a person who believes there should be a universal income. I think people should be able to have food and shelter and be able to support their family without having to work 3 jobs to do it, without ever being able to spend time with that family they want to take care of. And I believe that this would benefit society and that more people would be able to work on what they are passionate about and create and innovate on their terms, thus creating a better world for all of us. It's why there's so much nepotism in the arts, because it's rich people, it's people with free time who are able to take time and create. We never look at those people as lazy and entitled, but in the system we're in right now, sure, provide for your family, but that's different for each family. Sometimes that means that both parents work. Sometimes it means that one works and there's a stay-at-home parent. And if you don't think that the person providing love and comfort and care to a child is a provider, then you need to really think about what you think a provider is. And sometimes being a provider means that you use the social safety nets available to make sure that you are fed, to make sure that your child is fed. And we can't think of that person as any less of a provider.
In 2018, the American Psychological Association released its first ever guidelines on how you counsel boys and young men. And in that guideline, the APA denounced traditional masculine ideology as psychologically harmful, and they injected the phrase toxic masculinity into the veins of our culture.
So in the report he's talking about, they recognize that 90% of homicides are committed by men, and 77% of homicide victims are men. So they sought to address this because that's not great. There's something wrong with the men. There's something wrong with the boys. And in this study, it suggested that based on 40 years of research, many aspects of traditional masculinity are harmful. That's not saying that who men and boys are is necessarily harmful, but that they are being raised and they are being taught to navigate the world with outdated, harmful teachings and beliefs that have traditionally been tied to masculinity. It's about how boys are taught to suppress emotions, to bottle things up, how boys are taught to behave and to deal with problems in a way that causes more harm than good. The report never actually uses the term toxic masculinity.
Phrase, actually, it's just kind of this catch-all for any type of male aggression, any type of kind of distinctively male characteristics are now toxic masculinity, which is unfortunate. Few people are claiming that all masculinity is toxic, and yet all the data shows us that what men are hearing by and large is that there's something inherently defective about male character. So, and listen.
That's not true. That's not what toxic masculinity is. Toxic masculinity is talking about the negative traits that are typically taught to or encouraged in young boys that come out in manhood. Things like responding to every little inconvenience with anger and defensiveness, responding with yelling and punching walls instead of dealing with their own sadness, instead of listening to other people, instead of understanding their emotions. Toxic masculinity is thinking that you are owed a spot at the table based on the fact that you are a man rather than earning it. Toxic masculinity is thinking that you are owed sex because you paid for dinner or brought home the bacon, that you don't have to care about your partner's feelings because you paid for the house. Being strong isn't toxic. Being a bully is toxic. Not all masculinity is toxic, but we have to address the toxic parts of masculinity. Toxic is the adjective here. You wouldn't need to use an adjective if all masculinity was toxic. If all doors were red, you wouldn't need to say the red door, because you would just say the door because all doors are red.
And anybody that calls manhood toxic has no understanding of who God is and what he created us to be. And an attack on gender is an attack on the character and nature of God.
Someone understanding their own gender expression is not an attack on gender. It's just a better understanding of it. A person saying, hey, I think I might be trans, is not an attack on anyone else's manhood.
But they cheered when masculine leadership was called toxic. Families disintegrating because there aren't enough fathers staying. But they championed a culture that made fatherhood optional. Your sons are watching, learning that men don't fight, they retreat. That men don't build, they consume. That men don't lead, they apologize for existing. They're inheriting a world that can't function because an entire generation was convinced that men who make it function were oppressors.
Other people wanting to also be a part of the conversation or wanting to have leadership positions isn't an attack on you. Seeing it as an attack is a sign that this person is in fact an oppressor, or at the very least, benefiting from their oppression.
For men to just be men in the past few years has been called toxic. Like, dude, it's hard. When you look at a generation of boys growing up and say, you are the problem.
Yeah.
So the best solution for you is just sit down, be quiet, and keep playing the video game and not step into who God has called you to be. That is a problem.
It's not if you're a man, shut up. It's more, you don't have to speak just because you're a cis man. If you have something worthwhile, go ahead and contribute, but also let women speak. Let trans men speak. Let non-binary people speak. Shut up while they're talking. Listen while they're talking. Take accountability for your actions. Reflect. Stand up for people who are marginalized. Use your voice for more than just yourself. Recognize that you have a voice that certain people are more likely to listen to, and use that voice to change hearts and minds for the better. Also, someone disagreeing with you isn't the same as being silenced.
Same academics who created gender studies programs to deconstruct masculinity are now publishing research about the male loneliness epidemic, shocked that their theories had consequences.
Are they the same academics, or are they also academics? And if it is the same academics saying that there's a male loneliness epidemic, why is he just believing them about the male loneliness epidemic and not the other things that they're saying about gender? What is the correlation here that he thinks exists between gender studies and male loneliness?
Durably, statistically, undeniably suffering. This isn't opinion. This is documented fact. And every single time someone publishes these statistics, the response is identical. Oh, cry me a river. Well, maybe if masculinity wasn't toxic, you'd be fine. Men are finally experiencing what women have dealt with forever. Welcome to equality. Have they no empathy? No shame? These are their brothers, their husbands, their sons, their fathers. Human beings who are hurting, and the response is mockery?
And here's the thing. Loneliness sucks. Loneliness sucks a lot. I've been there. I will be there again. I've had times when I feel so alone, when I feel so unseen, where it feels like if I stopped existing, no one would care or notice. Believe me, I have been there. But I have never had the thought that if only they didn't teach gender study classes, I would be less lonely. If only women didn't have jobs, my loneliness would go away. This is the same guy who says that men should be strong, that a real man works for what he has, and that you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Most men avoid discomfort like it's death. But every time you step into fear, you step ahead of the pack. And the more you do it, the more you become the kind of man that women notice.
Except, I guess, when you're feeling lonely. That's because of gender studies. It's not up to you to put yourself out there, to work on yourself, to ask yourself if you are the person that you would want to hang out with. It's not up to you to change anything about yourself. And it's because of feminism. It's because of gender studies. So I'm going to be mad, and I'm going to make myself more sad, and I'm going to isolate myself more because of the epidemic.
What's a friend? How do you get a friend? How do you keep a friend? How come I don't have a friend?
In this series, because it's overwhelming. Men, by and large right now, feel disoriented, discouraged, and numb. They feel demoralized. And I don't, maybe that resonates with you. Maybe it doesn't. Like, I just wonder how many of you brothers feel lonely.
If you're dismissing any use of the phrase toxic masculinity by saying it's an attack on men, if you outright dismiss the American Psychological Association's attempt to address the problem that men and boys face because it hurts your ego, if you make men feel like the only way that they have any value is if they work themselves to exhaustion, you don't get to turn around and blame women and society for male loneliness. You don't get to say that masculinity is strength and then play the victim because you heard that there's a male loneliness epidemic.
Here's another fun fact. I haven't felt the loving embrace of a human being in over 3 months.
The statistics prove it. And when those statistics come out, oh, boo-hoo, poor men, check your privilege. Your brothers are killing themselves and people laugh. Your sons are drowning and culture mocks them. Fathers, husbands, neighbors, human beings in pain. And the response is cruelty. I'm angry. I'm angry on your behalf.
It's no wonder people keep saying that men aren't lonely enough, because men like this show that they don't want to improve. They don't want to advance. They don't want to learn. They want everyone to go back to the way it used to be. They want people to ignore their sexist comments, to ignore their backwards ways. They want to be praised for the bare minimum. They want to respond to everything with anger. And if they get pushback, they want to cry and say, but what about the epidemic? No, it's not funny. Mental health struggles are real, but you can't be a terrible person to people and expect that everyone is going to coddle you when you're sad. Women have been struggling with abuse from their partners, with sexual assault, with income inequality for so long. And for the most part, men didn't really care, or still don't care. But as soon as something affects men, everybody is supposed to stop what they're doing and work as hard as they can to fix it and kiss it better.
Oh, great. Just great. Another hunk. Stupid. Who cares? Who cares? I don't care. No one cares about me.
And that leads me into my second point, which is the emotional. A lot of people say that, men are not very emotional. I would argue that men are emotional. We just display our emotions in different ways. And one of the ways that I've explained it sometimes to women who will ask me, I was like, no, men tend to display emotion in terms of sarcasm or anger. Why is that? Because sarcasm or humor or anger are not generally associated with weakness. And men don't like to be associated with weakness, and we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be. A lot of times I'll hear people say, I want a man who's not afraid to cry. Do you though? Right? Like, come on. No woman, no other man wants to be around a guy that is just crying at the drop of the hat.
Yeah, I bet you thought he was going to say that men should be showing their emotions, that being vulnerable with those you love is a strength, not a weakness. But if that's what you thought, welcome to the channel. My name is Trevor. I do commentary on things I see evangelical Christians do. I kind of like add my 2 cents in there and talk about what's going on in evangelicalism. No, he's literally saying to bottle up your emotions and only express them in anger and sarcasm, which usually just means being a dick to people. We know that living that way destroys relationships, that it often causes men to act out in abusive ways, that it leads people further into isolation and loneliness and addiction. But the alternative to that is that you might not look as manly.
Now, that doesn't mean there are not appropriate times to cry. Believe me, when I walked my oldest daughter down the aisle, when we had our daddy-daughter dance at her wedding, I cried like a baby. Why? Because she was worthy of it. She was worthy of seeing that kind of tenderness from dad. But I had somebody put it to me this once. Well, it's okay for men to show that kind of tenderness. One, we need to be careful to who we show it to. And two, we need to be careful that we're not overly emotional in the midst of crisis. A man should be the sort of person that everyone else can depend on. When things are going awry, when things are dangerous, when things are uncertain, we need to be the safe harbor in the storm for our wives, for our children, for our friends. And so developing emotional maturity doesn't mean we never cry. It doesn't mean that we never show tenderness. It just means that we have control on our emotions.
Have some control in times of crisis. I get that completely. Be the strong one when you can. Put on a strong face when you think it'll help. And then when you get home, have a good cry. Talk it out with somebody. And don't think you have to be the strong one every single time. Take turns. We all have our breaking points. When you push down your emotions over and over again, when you deny what you're feeling over and over again, it is going to come out in negative and unhealthy ways. That's not being a real man. That is being irresponsible, and that is setting yourself up to be a ticking time bomb. And that is irresponsible. Nobody wants to be around somebody who's going to fly off the handle at any moment because anger is the only emotion that they are allowed to feel. Nobody wants to lose their father or brother or husband or friend because they didn't know how to show emotion, so they destroyed themselves from the inside out.
Modern women say things like, I want a man who's comfortable sharing his emotions, or I find it attractive when a man can cry in front of me, or I want a man who's soft and tender. This is a trap. Do not believe this type of thing when you hear it from women. Women think they want this until they actually get into a relationship with a man like this.
Women think they want that, but let me mansplain to you why they don't actually know what they want. Because women be wrong about what they be wanting. But also men need to be protectors.
If you're only a lamb with your family and they don't know that the lion can show up when he's needed, they'll always be insecure.
That's good.
Because you can never protect them.
Yeah.
And guess what? You've wandered into our school of tuna, and we now have a taste of lion. We've talked to ourselves. We've communicated and said, you know what? Lion tastes good. Let's go get some more lion.
God prepares men for battle, spiritually and physically. So prepare yourself for battle. Train your body, your mind, and your spirit. Forge them in discipline so that when the fight comes, you don't flinch.
Got you! Broken arm! Boom! 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 Broken nose! Boom! 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 Broken nose! Boom! Ha! Gonna flip you!
Man of God will protect his family physically from danger, but also psychologically and spiritually.
I don't know what these guys' imaginary scenarios are of who they are protecting their wives and children from, obviously besides gay books in the library. But most of the real life situations where somebody has to protect somebody they love, they are protecting them from a man. They aren't fighting off bears and tigers, it's men. And I bet in those situations, they wish that that man had learned to be in touch with his emotions and be honest with himself. I bet that they wish that that man recognized this toxic masculinity that is causing him to go after this family. And far too often, women and children need protecting from their husbands, who believed that being bullheaded was what men do, that being strong and manly meant suppressing their emotions. And I'm not saying don't stand up for people. That's not what I'm saying at all. Please do. The other day I was in the lobby at my building and this delivery guy called my neighbor a bitch. And I stepped in and firmly, with some choice words, escorted him off the premises. If I'm in a store and I hear somebody verbally assaulting a customer service worker, I step in. I call them out. And honestly, I'm surprised that I haven't been punched more by strangers. But the thing is, I hate bullies, so I stand up to them as often as I can. But I don't see myself as a great defender or protector. I don't tie it to my identity. And it could also be very toxic if I just went around looking for fights.
All great men have mustaches, Frank.
Yeah, but real men actually grow them, huh?
No, I have a hormone disorder.
Ooh. A lot of guys are like, I'm not really a leader. My wife leads. Satan's like, yeah, I've seen this before. This works really well to my advantage. The passive, silent, quiet guy has the wife who says, well, let me fill the gap. And Satan says, okay, well, let me be the head. See, the question is not, are we leading our family? The question is, are we leading our family or is Satan leading our family?
Every relationship is different. Some don't need any leadership because it's a pretty even partnership with lots of communication. And some have someone who takes on more of a leadership role in certain areas because that's what works for them. And sometimes there's a man-child who says that God made him the leader.
I'm not a cowboy. I'm a cowman. I'm a man.
So let me channel immediately when somebody's looking at this right now. Because we have been discipled so much by our culture, when somebody sees that like quote unquote hierarchy and sees God underneath man and then woman underneath man, somebody's asking, wait, I thought you said that men and women were equal. Why is man above categorically a woman according to your graph?
Is my child as valuable as I am? Yeah.
Yes.
But my child also is supposed to be in submission to me in terms of authority.
Well, let's hope that this guy's wife isn't a child. So that analogy goes right out the window.
So I think sometimes we immediately associate higher in authority or responsibility with higher in inherent value. And that is not the case.
For clarity, those lines of authority are within a family.
Yep.
So he's not, and we're going to get to this in a second. What this does not mean is that all men are in authority over all women. So we're going to get to that in a second.
Very key point. So
yeah, that line of authority that includes a magical talking snake, that's for families. So don't get that mixed up. But don't forget, these men hate their wives.
But how many of you have ever had your wife try to help, but it feels like a hostile takeover? You know, telling a story, and we all know you never let the truth get in the way of a good story, you know what I'm talking about? And you're like, so there I was. It was 4th of July at the beach 6 years ago. She's like, oh, actually, honey, it was Labor Day 2 years ago. We were at the lake. And she thinks she's helping, right? Yeah, man, she can't help it.
Ladies, there's a ton for you in this. My hope at the end of this is you know what to expect and that you will come alongside and support. I did not use the word nag. I did not use the word remind. I did not use the word henpeck, just an awareness so that you might call up. No one will have, if you're married, no one will have a more powerful voice than you in the heart of your man. No one will be able to crush him or provoke his pride quite like you either. So there's going to be a dance that you have to figure out here as even your husband or sons even try to grow into the fullness of what God has for them in Christ.
Yeah, wives, don't forget, you're going to have to walk on eggshells with your husband because we don't want to make him angry. His one emotion.
Actually, he goes on to tell Adam a little while later, he says this. He says, and Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife. Do you know you're not supposed to listen to the voice of your wife? You're like, what are you talking about? You remember the last time you listened to her voice? You're riding around in the truck, and you know she's mad. She's looking out the window, and you're like, what is out the window? You go, honey, you all right? She's like, I'm fine. Okay. She wasn't fine. You got to listen to her heart.
They hate their wives.
Listen and pay attention. And brothers, if you have a wife, I would try to listen to her. Quick caveat. I am not talking about being nagged to death. Do you know that the Bible says, this is God. Better for a man to die in the desert than to live in the house with a contemptuous woman. Right? That's not, sisters, you're a terrible Holy Spirit, and nagging provokes our pride. Like a surefire way to make sure your man never does is to nag him all the time.
And mind you, I've talked about this before, but he groomed his wife.
So fun for me to say now because people thought I was so crazy. And I knew when I left Colorado, I was going to marry Lauren Walker. I met Lauren at a youth camp where she was a student and I was the camp pastor. I can say with all integrity that everything was above board. I didn't know how it was going to work because it was, there was an age gap. I was in college, she was in high school. The kind of, what do you do with that? You're the camp pastor, she's the camper.
What you do with that is nothing. You don't pursue a high school student who you are in charge of teaching and guiding spiritually. You just don't do that. He was trying to make her his perfect little church wife, and he still talks about her like that.
Right? That's not, sisters, you're a terrible Holy Spirit, and nagging provokes our pride. Like a surefire way to make sure your man never does is to nag him all the time.
He still hates her.
Hey, you can jot this down. When you fight at home, if you're a husband, you got two options. You can be right or you can be married. Those are your options. There's a lot of dudes that are right. They ain't married no more.
But the only real way to be a real man is to be a follower of Christ, because they have to tie it to their brand.
Most important, you will not be able to love your wife the way she deserves, your children the way they deserve. You will not be able to be the sort of man that your friends need, that your community needs, that your country needs, if you're not the sort of man that puts your relationship with God first. That's essential. And so I always list it as number one.
I don't know where you go to church. I know if you go to Pastor James' church, you are hearing the good news of the gospel. But if you have ever thought that you have to check your testicles at the door to follow after Jesus Christ, then that is not the case. In fact, you need to grow a pair and stand up and act like the man that God has called you to be. You make no apologies about being the man that God has called you to be.
That's right. When you go to church, you're allowed to be a man.
Okay, then. That was always allowed.
So what is a man? A man puts his trust in God as the foundation of his life.
A man uses his strength and humility to honor those around him.
A man chooses faith, not fear, in all circumstances.
So for these people who swear that gender is not a spectrum and that a man is an adult male or someone with an XY chromosome and a penis, they sure have made it a very exclusive club. A man has a job, a man is a protector, a man has his wife that he leads but doesn't listen to, a man doesn't use a mirror or eat frozen yogurt unless he's on a date, and a man is a Christian, specifically an evangelical Christian, a non-liberal Christian. So basically, there aren't very many men.
This kind of man's so dangerous because he can't be controlled. Because a man who fears God doesn't fear men. Because a man who speaks the truth can't be manipulated.
And it's true. These men actually don't think they're being controlled. They actually think that they are truly free. It doesn't matter that they are all acting the exact same way, that they all define what it means to be a man in the same way, that they're all afraid of vaccines and masks. It doesn't matter that they haven't had an original thought in years. They are the ones that can't be controlled. They are the ones that are thinking outside the system. I can't be manipulated. Anyways, I think everyone has a pre-assigned role to play based on their genitalia, but no, I can't be manipulated. Anyways, Trump is innocent of all the charges and never went to that island, and he's a Christian who loves God. And also, he said gas prices would go down and we wouldn't have any new wars. But he knew what he was doing, and I can't be manipulated. I give 10% of my money to a church, but I can't be manipulated.
Well, step one is a great man is a redeemed man. Like, if you don't know Jesus, you'll never know how to be a great man. Yeah. Because you need the God man in you to do for you what you cannot do for yourself.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but did he just say that in order to be a great man, you have to have a man inside of you? Did I hear that right?
God needs to be first in your life. A real man will humble himself under the lordship of Jesus Christ. You will obey him out of love.
I must be misunderstanding. That's a figure of speech, right? They're big, strong men. They see themselves as alphas. They aren't going to bow the knee to no one.
The answer is not buck up or cowboy up. The answer is look up and say, I need help. You want to stand firm and act like men? It begins by bending your knee to Jesus and saying, I can't do it without you. The three most dangerous words a grown man can say is, I got this. Because the beginning of the gospel is, bro, we ain't got this. We need someone to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves.
I mean, I agree to a point. There are times when you need to lean on others for help. You should be honest with yourself about where your limitations are. But anytime someone says, I couldn't have done this without God, I always just want to grab their shoulders and say, but you did. You did do this without God. You did get through that hard time without God. That strength was your strength. Yes, ask people for help. Yes, find someone to talk to. Yes, be vulnerable and have emotions in front of the people you love. But you aren't useless without God. You aren't nothing without God. You are strong because you are strong. And no one else gets to define what strength is. And no one else gets to define who you are.
Are you a boy pretending to be a man? Or have you actually stepped up in your God-given calling and chosen to stand firm?
Be watchful. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong. Let all that you do be done in love.
Boys don't become men simply by growing older. We become men when we kneel before our King, surrender our life, and acknowledge that we don't have what it takes without Him.
Getting self-worth by playing the part of a big, strong, manly man, often denying themselves the simple joys in life, pretending to be something that they are not, to fight a culture that doesn't give a shit how they present themselves, to then turn around and say they are nothing and worthless and weak without God, sounds pretty weak to me. Be who you are. Be who you want to be. Dress how you want. Act like you want. Do what you want. You're not living for them. You don't have to play a role. You can be yourself. Act like you. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for making it this far. If you know someone who may benefit from it, send it their way and enjoy.
Work, Sky Moon.